It's a great honor to welcome Paul Gottfried to this podcast for the third time. He is the editor-in-chief of Chronicles magazine and a first-rate conservative mind. Um, our conversation will be focused on the Greek thinker Panagiotis Kondylis, who wrote a great work on conservatism back in the
Mhm.
80s. But of course, the conversation can be expanded to conservatism, past and present in general. So, guten Tag, Paul. It's good to have you on the show once again.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Okay. I wonder, I wonder from your perspective, especially in the European continent, what do you make of the alliance between conservatism and populism?
Um, well, if you read some of my more theoretical works, I suggested that conservatism is no longer a viable political option. I generally accept Kondylis's views about the über das Wesen des Konservatismus, the nature of conservatism, and believe like him that conservatism is basically the worldview or ideology um, of those reacting against the French Revolution in defense of a more traditional hierarchical society. Um, I know that some people find this fixation of mine intolerable. You know, conservatism is I don't know, it's Ben Shapiro or whoever is on TV this hour, uh, some black questioning affirmative action programs. You know, I think some of the things they say are okay, but they're not conservatives in the sense in which Condylis or I would recognize a conservative. I do recognize there are American conservatives. You know, there's an American variant on conservatism, um, which you find among Southern agrarians. You certainly find it among the planter class of the Confederacy. Uh, you find it among New England high Federalists and so forth. And these are people who sound very much like European conservatives. Um, but I don't think conservatism is a um, a living creed or doctrine at this time. What I would say, however, is that there is an alliance of the right with populism, and the right, I would argue, is basically a post-conservative phenomenon. It is the people who are reacting against the left in the name of some kind of traditional society. It's not going to be the ones that conservatives were trying to defend in the 19th century, but these are people who are reacting vigorously and usually, well, I would hope effectively against the left. Now, the fact that they've allied themselves with the working class is understandable because the working class are the least infected by the woke virus. They, uh, in terms of their values, they are the most traditional, and they are natural allies of the right. Corporate capitalism is not. Corporate capitalism is a major force in the woke regime, the woke takeover of Western civilization. Without corporate capitalism, I could not even imagine it taking place. Okay, the corporate capitalists pay for this, they payroll all of this, they use their vast economic power to push cultural radicalism. So the fact that the right-wing populists are not lining up with corporate capitalism is quite understandable. I would be absolutely shocked if they did. Um, but the alliance that's taking place here and in Europe is historically understandable.
So I'm currently sitting at Budapest, Hungary right now, and it seems to be a hotspot for Americans who are conservative and on the right to to look upon as a model, so to speak. So from your side of the Atlantic, what do you make of Hungary's political present.
Yeah, I mean, Hungary is not going to bring about some major change in the political order. It's a small country. It has about 10 million people. I'm a great fan of the Hungarians. My father's family come from Budapest, and I visited the city a number of times. And Hungarian was like the second language I learned after German, although I unfortunately forgot most of it. English was third, and I obviously retained my English. So I wish the Hungarians well. Orban, I think, is a thoroughly admirable man. Um, and I'm absolutely disgusted by the way the totalitarian left in the European Union are attacking him as some kind of neo-Nazi. I mean, I can't believe what I'm hearing. When he describes himself as a Christian Democrat, that's what he is. He's a post-World War Christian. I suppose the fact that he does not allow minors to have transgender operations shows that he's a neo-Nazi from the perspective of the European Union, or the fact he doesn't encourage uh, gay institutions, gay marriage, the rest of the woke agenda shows that he's a bad man. But I do admire him. I admire his courage. I admire his government. Um, but I don't think that what he has done represents any kind of decisive turn in civilization. Um, he sort of provides, one might say, a kind of rallying point for the opposition to wokeness in Western civilization. Um, but we're going to have to win a lot more victories before we can push back the left.
It seems that a problem that has struck the European continent a lot more than it has struck America is the threat of radical Islam. I think cities in France have, I think, been completely overtaken by it, and parts of Germany have been overtaken by it. I think from my experience in Budapest, I don't see much of it, and yeah, thank God for that. So, how did this form of political radicalism manage to make its way into this continent and not, I suppose, America?
Well, my book on the post-Marxist left, I point to the importance of certain leftist fashions, or become leftist fashions. One is to stress white European Christian guilt for the Holocaust. This I think cannot be the obsession with the Holocaust is important. I speak as somebody whose family fled from the Nazis, but you could understand how this becomes basic to the victory of the cultural radicals all over Europe, because they do say that all white Christians are to blame. We bear collective blame for this. In France, you're not even allowed to say anymore. I've been reading some of the French literature on this. You're not allowed to say that the Vichy government saved three-quarters of the Jews in France. They were not the apatrides, the ones without country. They were the indigènes. They were French citizens. Some were born in France. But, they get say, you're not to say this. You have to say they were even worse than the German Nazis. And all the French people collaborated, except for the communists, who obviously are good people by the standard of judgment. In the case of the Germans, everything in their history is supposedly evil because it's tainted by the Holocaust. And then, of course, you look for antecedents to the Holocaust, or Nazism, which is associated everywhere. So, Kaiser Wilhelm, Bismarck were Nazis. Martin Luther was that. I mean, everybody's a Nazi. Who has the misfortune of being white and Christian, right? And even people who are not white and Christian who ally themselves with white Christians are bad, because they too become sort of collaborators by extension in a way of life and regime that has to be radically changed in order to atone for the past. And the German expression about Vergangenheits, what is Vergangenheitsbewältigung, conquering the past. This, you have to all your time doing this. Another entry point into the woke left that has taken over is anti-colonialism. Right? I mean, the people who were subject to European colonialism were treated much worse than any other colonial powers in history. I mean, the Muslims may have gone around in East Africa enslaving blacks, treating them, but it's okay because they weren't Christians. They were victims of Christians because the Christians supposedly started the Crusades, which they didn't. But this goes. What you have here is an emphatic, and I think at the end, pathological rejection of Western Christian society in all of its aspects, except atoning for the past. And one of the ways in fact, the major way you atone for this past, there are two ways. One is you entirely strip yourself of your heritage. In the United States, President Biden played up Transgender Visibility Day on Easter Sunday. Because Easter Sunday is somehow implicated in the sins of white Christian society, because transgender are victims of white Christians. Therefore, these are good people. So when you have to just. The other thing is you open up your borders and let everybody else come in who's hostile to your civilization, so they can help destroy it faster. Now, I think what you have like the European Union, you say, well, gee, they're interested in total power. They're interested in suicide. This is my concern. It's not a power struggle in any historic political sense that we're seeing. It's an act of suicide in which those who are committing suicide try to pull in Hungary, I don't know, Latvia, other countries that are not insane, and which are trying to preserve not only national identity, but physical safety at this point. So I think wokeness represents the greatest threat ever faced by Western civilization. More than Nazism, more than communism, it is the greatest threat because it is the most utterly pernicious. It is going to destroy everything in the end. And unfortunately, the ruling classes in every Western democracy, we use with quotations, since I don't use anything democracy, they're totalitarian dictatorships that we're now looking at. These governments destroy their opposition. There's very little opposition to them. So people look to Hungary. No, it's a small country that's intact, and it's very hard to find other such examples. Certainly not Germany. Germany is the most infected. I cannot see any future for Germany.
Yeah, I think I could say the same for France, or at least in the big cities of France. I know that there's a growing right-wing reaction to it with Madame Le Pen and everyone. I think about the novels of Michel Houellebecq. He really hit the nail on the head, I think, with Submission, his controversial book. And what he's getting at is that as France is leaving behind its Christian heritage, which it has, is all too welcoming, or it would be too welcoming to the currents of radical Islam. So in some ways, radical Islam comes at this exact point where Europe is stripping itself of Christ. And I think that is a crisis that people who are of the, I guess, liberal European Union framework tend not to think about too much.
No, I agree about Houellebecq. I mean, he does in Mission and some of his other novels. He shows you how utterly decadent society is. And Houellebecq, if you ask him, he doesn't vote. He's sort of an anarchist. They have no views. He's sort of like beyond that. I mean, it's probably hopeless. There was a German writer who wrote the Finis Germaniae, committed suicide at my age. He's sort of an ecologist. He just gave up on everything. He said, there's absolutely no hope. He says I could see Germany in 100 years, the only conflict will be between rival Muslim gangs fighting in the streets of Berlin. And he's probably right. I mean, there's absolutely nothing that I can see as the German. And by the way, in case of Germany, you have one of the most courageous and brilliant right-wing intellectual opposition. I wish we had such, that the American right was, the conservative movement looked something like the German right. I mean, these people are marvelous. And the same thing is true about their counterparts in France. The problem is They have no influence, particularly in Germany. They have absolutely none. You say the wrong thing, they drag you with a the Verfassungsschutz or some court, the Bundesgericht or something. They drag you. They try you for hate crimes, for Hetzerei or Hetzreden. They go after you for nothing. You know, just that you oppose, you say, well, maybe you have a few too many Muslims in the country, or I wish a little less violent. They'll go after you as a racist and anti-Semite, which have doing nothing to do with what you're saying. Germany is hopeless. I mean, their civil liberties are sort of on par with, you know, the state of civil liberties in the Soviet Union. I mean, there's absolutely nothing at this point. And what makes it even worse is that people vote for these horrible parties. This what is it, Parteienblock of the left. They vote for this. They win. People say, oh, it's terrible. People vote for them. They deserve what they're getting. I mean, I see absolutely no other conclusion that I can draw. I don't think people in New York City, you know, the black neighbors, are victimized. They vote for these horrible governments. You know, I mean, we're told that all the Germans bear the sins of Nazism because probably less than 1/3 of Germans ever cast their vote for the Nazis. Here you have well over half these populations voting for lunatics. You know, voting for you want to open the country to hostile. People vote for this. It's fine. They want to take their freedoms away. Fine. They don't care. I can't believe what happened in Scotland. I mean, they brought this. The regime is anti-white, far left, woke leftist, and they can arrest you and put you in jail if somebody said you said something politically incorrect. But the head of the government, who seems to come from the third world, began attacking white people, and that's not considered a hate crime. It's perfectly okay. But this crazy government, which is at least as crazy as the Nazi government, was elected by a majority of the people there. I mean, what are we to say? You know, I mean, the governments are absolutely odious and horrendous, but what kind of people would vote for them? You know, is my question.
Yes, I think what happened to Germany and Scotland recently, I think, can be traced back to two events that happened around the same time. So for the Scottish people, I think it is the failure of the independence referendum that really set them off the edge.
Right.
For Germany, I think is when the CDU, Christian Democratic Union, merged with the SPD, the Social Democratic Union. And in some ways, I think that diminished the power that the Christian Democrats have over politics. I think that's
I think it's the other way around.
Okay.
I think the under Merkel that said they moved all the way to the left
Oh.
on every social issue, and the Sozialdemokraten were not on cultural social issues a leftist party at all, any more than the Democrats in the United States. The party ceased to be socialist, as did the English Labor Party. I mean, except for some of the really kooky elements when nationalization brought back. But what they've done is become cultural social radicals. And that I argue in my book on anti-fascism, my book on the post-Marxist left, is the major transformation of the left. I mean, the left is no longer an economic left in any historic sense. Although you turn on Fox News and say, oh, these people are sort of Marxists. No, they're not. They're cultural maniacs. They're cultural radical maniacs. And they no longer are a threat to the economic interests of corporate capitalists because they're not that interested in that stuff. They're interested in the Green New Deal, which means they're going to give goodies to the corporate capitalists who support them. By the way, I totally agree with Marxists now on that. The corporate capitalists are following their economic interests by destroying society. This is the way they perceive their economic interests, and you cannot excuse their role or say they're Marxist. These are not Marxists. Corporate capitalism is a major pillar of the woke revolution. So that it looks like they're going to do terrible things to these rich people. No, they're not. They're not going to do anything to these rich people because the rich people are funding the Cultural Revolution. you say, well, we're going to raise corporate taxes. Guess who pays for those raised corporate taxes? Workers pay for those. They lose their jobs, they get paid lower salaries, and of course, earnings are falling in just about every Western so-called democracy now. So, I mean, the workers are suffering. They're not doing well at all. That's why they're part of the right-wing coalition. Strange it may seem, but the Social Democrats gave up being socialist, really, and became like the Labour Party in England. They became cultural radicals.
Now, back to Condilis. You mentioned that he identifies himself as a Marxist, and of course, I share your frustration that the English language speaking right, eh, they deem everyone who's the enemy of who is on the opposite of theirs as a Marxist, where for the most part, I think people who are of the left of the progressive wing, I don't think they can spell any part of Capital or Communist Manifesto or any Marxist other great writings. So for Condilis, what is a Marxist? Well, who is a Marxist?
Well, the case of Condilis, there was very definitely a Marxist component in his thinking about conflict, and claims of power, Machtsprüche. Um, when he was in Greece, of course, he was involved in some kind of radical Marxist activity against the government, which is one of the reasons he left. He came from a wealthy family. He did become a political radical in his youth. He goes to Germany, and I think what happens, he gradually comes under the influence of right-wing ideas, and particularly the political writings of Carl Schmitt, which I think influenced both of us profoundly. And I had a correspondence with Condilis for a few years until he unexpectedly died, some kind of a cardiac problem that I had not been aware of. But both of us were heavily influenced, I think, by Carl Schmitt, and that may explain for the overlap in our thinking. Um, my own disagreement with Condilis is about the same as my disagreement with Sam Francis, who was also a friend of mine. That I do understand, um, you know, control of society in terms of power and power alliances and people, struggling for power against others. I think their insights are true, but I don't think one can rule out the importance of ideology as a separate factor. And I think both of them underestimate the importance of what I think are religious myths that drive even the most lunatic behavior, particularly the most lunatic behavior. Um, that people really believe in ideas that we may find lunatic. And I meet a lot of people who believe in woke ideology. I taught over 40 years in the academy. Most of my colleagues believe this stuff. The person who replaced me in Dow chair uh, fully accepts all of this stuff, and Trump is Hitler. We have to fight for the transgender and these people and these groups and so he believes this stuff. And there are a lot of people who do, and I think the attempt to see what the ruling class is doing simply in terms of power tends to ignore the ideological motives that drive their action and which they share with those who follow them. All the universities for years have been teaching woke ideology. We have to assume that at some level they believe this, which complicates the picture because it's not simply about struggles for power or you see power motives in everything and the agonistic elements in human relation. I mean, they're all there. I agree with Condilis, Sam Francis, Carl Schmitt. They're all right about this. I think people can see we share the same family of ideas, but I think all of them underestimate the enormous power of ideology. And I don't think one can understand woke ideology unless one understands Christianity. Because without Christian, I mean, obviously woke ideology is different from Christianity, but I cannot see woke ideology taking hold in a non-Christian society, one that had not been Christian at an earlier point, because woke ideology makes use of Christian myths, Christian eschatology, all kinds of other Christian elements you see there. And most other societies really don't, aren't based on a mercy for the downtrodden, belief that at the last will be first, and so forth. There are Christian themes that are interwoven with woke ideology, however distorted they are in the form in which they now appear.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a it's a very interesting thing you touch on because it's true that for the non-Western world, and I would say that for the Christian non-Western world too, woke ideology does not find a
Mhm.
fertile soil to grow under. It is always either what you call the post-Christian West that
Right.
that wokeism takes roots.
Yeah, I think that Christians in the non-West are not yet in a post-Christian society. They're still Christians, and the broader context in which they live is Asian or so African. So I mean, they're not going to be affected. Maybe in 200 years, but again, many of their societies are so traditional. They do not look like Western society before the wokesters took over, which was already a disintegrated authority structure. One in which the modern administrative state had tremendous power, and then you have the media, which by entirely they're the priesthood of the woke ideology now, and they're the same in every Western country. But I don't think people in China or Vietnam listen to them or care less what they say.
So according to Condilis, is conservatism an ideology in and of itself or a reaction to ideology?
No, he would say it does form an ideology. And this, I think here he's following Karl Mannheim,
Hmm.
in his work Das Konservative Denken, published in 1927 originally, in which he sees the counter-revolutionary right, which becomes conservatism, in the early 19th century, as being an ideology, right? I mean, there is sort of a kind of expectation about sort of that at some point in the future there'll be a transformation in which this set of ideas is going to conquer. So it is not simply a reaction to what had gone on before. As I argue in some of my early writings too, it's not simply a reaction. There is an expectation that society will be radically transformed and that this set of ideas and these social institutions will take their place. Also, the conservatives, um, I think Condilis would recognize this. According to conservatives, do not come along first in the early 19th century. I think here we may have a little disagreement. He sees them as people reacting against the new monarchy, going back into early modern period in Europe. They're the ones who are defending aristocratic privilege, who resist centralization, right, and try to hold on to their manorial control and so forth. He argues that what becomes a conservative ideology in the 19th century is prefigured in the work of these earlier reactionaries against monarchical centralization.
And so you've sent me a few really interesting articles that you wrote in Chronicles. Something that I've been thinking about is that there are at least two scenarios to, I guess, to defeat wokeism, so to speak. One is to just let it run its course and wreak all the destruction that it it inevitably wreaks. And eventually, people who are non-woke and who are conservatives will find that, well, it is a rotten ideology, and we should and some point in time we can reconstruct society based on non-woke principles. And secondly, which is hopefully what we are doing right now, is to try to stop it at every turn. So which of these two courses are more favorable to you?
Well, obviously stopping it at every turn, but I don't think it's possible. I had this piece in Chronicles it was a blog piece, and in which I suggested that we may not have enough power to do very much at all, and that however defective and even occasionally odious the conservative movement is, which has in the United States has pretty much cut off the right and tries to have dialogues with the left, no matter how disgusting I personally find them, with some exceptions perhaps. Um, we really cannot do very much more. We're in a very weak position on the right, and I look at my friends in Germany. Boy, opening your mouth, you can end up losing your job, being destroyed, possibly being thrown in jail. And this is where Western democracy is at this point. And the right is isolated. I could possibly see, I don't know, in France, is the right going to win? I mean, maybe I can't even see the Rassemblement National win, let alone the Reconquête of Eric Zemmour. I can't even see them winning because the bloc parties keep them out, and they're all woke leftist parties. Woke leftist pro-big business parties. I mean, they're all the same. Capitalism always travels with wokeness now, with few exceptions. Maybe the not big capitalism, but small decline capitalism. The smaller capitalists don't. But it seems to me that we've been dealt a very bad hand, and I suggest that at the end of the day, the conservative movement may be protecting us against something worse, which is simply giving the left a free hand. Now, the discussion was about England because a young friend of mine, Nima Parvini, was suggesting that we should encourage the Labour Party to win all the seats in Parliament, and we can get rid of the useless Conservative Party, and then somehow we can take power after. That's not the way it works. The other party gets in, they're going to put you in jail. They're going to find hate speech, whatever junk they can come up with to totally isolate any opposition, serious opposition. So the fact that in the United States we have Fox News with the New York Post, most of which I think is god awful, but we have somebody opposing the left for something. The fact that we have Trump running for president, somebody whom I do not particularly admire or like, but who obviously drives the left up the wall, which is entirely to his favor, by the way, and he could win, and he could hold back the left. If you remember, Carl Schmitt has this theory of the Katechon, the person who holds back, the victory of the coming of the apocalypse. And this goes back to St. Augustine, and earlier you see this in St. Paul, this idea that you do have somebody who keeps the world from coming to an end. And St. Augustine believed that when the Roman Empire falls, then everything is going to fall apart. And this is exactly the way I view the conservative movement as the Katechon. It is there to hold back the total victory of the totalitarian left. And they're as defective as some of the later Roman emperors. I do not praise them. They did a lot to destroy the right. They collaborated with the left in destroying it. But they're all that we have. And if any change does come about, because the left is inherently unstable, they're lunatics. They're going to destroy each other in the end. The transgender, the black nationalists, the Muslims, they're all going to go after each other. I may not live to see it, but I know they'll destroy each other. And only then can there be, can an alternative take power? But I really don't see the struggle against them, being won by something called the right. We do not, outside of Hungary, we have no power in the Western world that I can see.
Yes, I definitely see the nations of Central Europe offering some sort of resistance against
Yes. I think you're right,
wokeism.
Slovakia, or
Yeah.
even Poland is weak. You had the
Yes.
woke left winning in Poland, and the Tusk government. I mean, even that doesn't look very good to me. But I trust the Baltic countries. They don't get overrun by Putin. And they're obviously less infected by wokeism because they've been less controlled by the United States.
Mhm.
I think the victory of wokeness seems to follow the course of American empire, at least in Europe. I mean, Germany was the most, England really controlled by the United States culturally, and they're the most wokeified. Um, whereas countries in Eastern Europe less so. By the time you get to Asia, no. But I mean, even a country like Japan that now seems to have a feminist and gay rights, but perhaps they're much less powerful there than they are in the post-Christian West.
Now, for Candelas, who believe that conservatism is a historical phenomenon, I wonder to what extent does he believe that that phenomenon is necessary?
What, conservatism is necessary, or
Yes, conservatism is it?
well, it was in its time, but he did another book, which sort of a follow-up book on die liberale, die bürgerliche Denkwelt, something like that is the title. And this is really liberal, bourgeois liberal society of the 19th century. Remember, I wrote a book on this, which very closely parallels Condilis's work. But mine sort of gets into the nitty grit of administrative economic change that's occurring. But Condilis, I think, sees conservatism as a spent force, and it's replaced by bourgeois liberalism. And I generally agree with that, by the way. I'm not as deterministic as he is, but I think his general outline is correct. So if you ask, where is conservatism going, he would probably say it's not going to go anywhere.
Yes, and do you believe that the relationship or the alliance between the liberals, which are people who believe in like the bourgeois version of society, and the radicals who do not believe in that at all, does it come from their being like cozy up to each other, or it's more like a
Well,
hostage
I mean, again,
situation?
if you read my article on the post-liberal hell, which is, I don't know, real clear politics, others, it was my editorial for the April issue of Chronicles. What I suggest is that for 100 years we've been living in a post-liberal society. I accept Cordelis's distinction there. The liberal society was in the 19th century West, and by our standards, would be very conservative. It had limited suffrage, women didn't vote, um, property holders got to vote, exercise for power, but they favored religious freedom, intellectual freedom, uh, a generally free market economy, and constitutional government, constitutional monarchies, constitutional republics. These to me are the true liberals. Then you get social democrats who build the administrative state who call themselves liberal. I do not accept them as liberal. I think by then the term, as I argue in my book After Liberalism, the term becomes abused. Social democrats are not liberals, they're social democrats. And what happens in the post-liberal world is that some liberal freedoms are preserved. So you get people who believe in a social democratic government. Some believe in government ownership of things, like the English Labour Party after the Second World War, but believed in open debate and generally in religious freedom. So what they do is they sort of pick and choose aspects of the liberal heritage they hold on to. But this, I argue, was a transient stage in the disappearance of liberalism. And we're seeing now is the end. We don't care about any of this stuff anymore, and we've moved on to a woke dictatorship of some kind. And there's resistance in the United States. Where is it coming from? Small towns. I live in a small town. Most of my neighbors are, come out of German Protestant farming families. They're all going to vote for Trump, except most of them, except for academics at the college. Um, Now, if they were to take over, um, or- I can't imagine they would care very much about returning to a 19th century liberal society. Um, they might sort of tolerate open discussion. Maybe when they don't care about these things very much. They just want to survive as a group. And this is what I basically see as the future. You simply have people holding on in enclaves, and they're simply resisting the woke leftist dictatorship that's being imposed throughout the Western world. um, and they're not going to restore 19th century liberalism because we're living in a post-liberal society, and most of it's going to be hell because the people who are taking over have no respect for human freedom. They have no respect for your right to do anything, and they push this absolutely abnormal, degenerate social agenda, wokeness, whatever, transgender, gay marriage, whatever nuttiness that they can, because they utterly despise the Western Christian foundations they're destroying. So this is I really I think eventually they will lose power because they'll be fighting among themselves. And as I always tell people, I will root for the Muslims against the feminists. I'll root for the black nationalist against the transgender. No problem. The decadent white people, that's what I really have it in for.
Yes. So I think if Fukuyama's analysis is right, and liberal democracy is the last like movement of mass politics, if
You ask me, do I believe that? Not at all.
Hmm,
I do not believe that at all.
okay.
We're not living in liberal. What he did is he simply tried to, he was deceiving us.
Hmm,
What would come is totalitarianism. It is not democracy.
okay.
No, I mean, this was the neoconservative party line that he was expressing it, and other neocons just pushed this party line. It's totally untrue.
Hmm,
It bears no resemblance to reality. Um, it's it's almost an attempt to sort of make peace with the established order.
hmm.
So whatever comes along will be liberal democracy. We'll just call it liberal democracy.
Yes. So I guess what I was getting at is that if we do see the end of liberal democracy run its course, then I guess politics in general would be a lot more parochial. It would no longer be like a mass movement, either nationally or
Oh
internationally.
well, no. I think what you're going to have in the West is a totalitarian, woke, uh, globalist order. They think it's going to take over. And the term liberal democracy, by the way, disturbs me terribly
Mhm,
because we on the American right spoke of it as a constitutional republic, not as a liberal democracy. Um, and the liberal democracy, I think, is as I argue in my book, Revisions in Dissent, is a neoconservative invention, or liberal democratic invention. Liberal Democrats in the American sense. American conservatives said we're living in a constitutional republic. Republic is different from a democracy, right? It assumes a delegated power, a higher degree of decentralization, and generally more conservative cultural values.
yes, understood. Um, to the extent that Condilis know about American conservatism, what does he make of it?
I think he has no understanding of American
Oh.
conservatives. He has very little knowledge of the United States. His knowledge is of Greece and Germany, basically, societies in which he lived. The United States is different. Um, I mean, it's founded as a constitutional republic in the 18th century. Um, and what happens is that, over time, the central government takes over. The Civil War is decisive for that. You know, the Civil War is a war in which no matter which side had won, would have been very good, which is true about most wars. And the Although a victory by the southern side may have been less dangerous in terms of consolidation of government in the United States, and um, the consolidated government in the 20th century, which had been a government consolidated on behalf of capitalists mostly. I think some of the Marxists are right on this. It was sort of big government with big capitalism, which went in the Civil War. Then you have an enormous administrative state, which is at least partly constructed in the progressive era, starting with Woodrow Wilson. Um, but the United States does not start as a medieval monarchy or anything like that. I mean, it starts as a constitutional republic. In some ways, probably closer to Holland, a country like Holland, than a country like England or Poland or Italy. Or well, Italy also sort of starts out as a liberal monarchy in the 19th century. Um, but Spain may be a better example. But in any case, Condilis does not really know very much about what's going on in the United States. It's very clear if you read him. You know, it's like almost like reading Hegel, somebody like that. You know, reading their comments about the United States. They really don't know much about the subject.
Who would Condilis regard as the great conservatives?
Well, the people who are the great conservatives in the early 19th century, Bonal, Mestre, Edmund Burke, I mean, people, you know, who were read, and a lot, number of German conservatives like Albrecht von Harlow, Friedrich Stahl, others are writing, but, you know, they're classical conservatives that he's describing. They're not the founders of National Review or the people who are in the, you know, the Fox News groupies at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The people he describes as conservatives, I have no problem accepting as conservatives because that's what they were.
I suppose, do you believe that it is what causes the erosion of academia or, the humanities, the result of, you know, uh, favoring of classical liberal thinkers like Hobbes and Locke over the classical conservative
Well, I don't know. I suppose I have here what might almost be described as a racial idea about this. But when I think during the period of the WASP ascendancy, when you had sort of a Northern European Protestant patrician class running the country and running universities, the Ivy Leagues, you know, things were pretty good.
thinkers.
It's not that these people were necessarily smarter than Jews or Chinese or this, but they ran things well. They had a sense of fair play, although they were prejudiced, I suppose, as most human beings have been. They did respect intellectual freedom. They did maintain qualitative controls, and they kept maniacs out of those positions, entirely to their credit. You know? It's when they fell apart and they became the Bush family or some of these other sort of less impressive people sort of going soft in the head or something, and they ceased to be what they once were. that things fell apart. Now, I'm aware that some of the leaders of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, other schools were prejudiced human beings, but they do not come close to the raging bigots who are running those institutions right now. And I think it's the fact that the ruling class in the United States disintegrates. It's either replaced, I think disintegrates more than is replaced, which does incalculable harm to American academia. Um, it's sort of the old families that ran things, the patrician class. I mean, they could have been nicer, they could have been a bit more pluralistic, and they would have probably become that. They were becoming that actually over time. But it's the fact that they disintegrate and the people who replace them are absolutely horrible. Um, it's like going, to almost like the German ruling class in 1900 and looking at the Nazi regime afterwards. I mean, the other ones weren't all, they may have had their problems, the Junkers or the others, but replaced them was absolutely horrible. And I think that's true about academia in America. And, I sort of came at the very end of the old WASP patrician rule in the Ivy League school, and I could see how it was crumbling. But some of its last representatives, like Kingman Brewster at Yale, were so decadent, and they supported the Black Panthers. I think they were awful. So it's not that the others, the radicals, come along and sort of take over. It's these people themselves became decadent, which I think was a major problem. But at an earlier time, the people who were the trustees, the boards of these universities, generally ran them well. You could have, it'd be nicer if they were a little more open to diversity or something like that. But they respected standards and they kept lunatics, out of those professions. And the lunatics took over very quickly, once the old ruling class had decayed.
Yes. So from what you know of the Weimar Republic, I wonder, do you believe that the collapse of that regime started at the universities?
To some extent, although it could be exaggerated in my view. I think a lot of what happened in Germany was unfortunate accident. Um, it's I mean, obviously, England, which had a stronger parliamentary tradition, would have been less inclined to accept some what turned out to be a dangerous lunatic totalitarian regime than France or Germany or Russia. Um, and it sort of had more, what is the term I'm looking for? Sort of safeguards or something rails. What is the term? Damage rails or something like that. Um, but the guardrails. But a lot of it is just unfortunate history. I mean, if the Depression had not hit Germany in 1929, what you would have had is, some kind of republic, a pretty conservative republic. It would have, it would have survived. Um, uh, if the I'm thinking that if the last Kaiser had not simply abdicated and run off, but had left his monarchy to his grandson, um, there would have been some kind of monarchical continuity, which would have been good. Even if Kaiser Wilhelm made mistakes, so I would argue he was no more irresponsible than any other European ruler at the time. They were all equally irresponsible. But they were on the losing side. If there'd been some continuity in the government, if the Great Depression had not hit, because the Weimar Republic did seem to be doing pretty well in the 1920s once they got beyond the initial financial problems, they're able to, the reparations were a bit of a problem. And the Germans had to land up paying back reparations after World War II for World War I. I mean, the reparations were entirely unfair. By the way, I think there should have been reparations, but everybody should have paid to rebuild France for where most of the war took place, not only the losing side. Everybody should have done that. Um, but I think the Weimar Republic was certainly salvageable. And the degree, even with all the communists and Nazis making riots on the streets, and they collaborated to bring down the Republic, the communists were every bit as responsible as the Nazis. They worked together to destroy the Weimar Republic. But despite that, the the condition of freedom, constitutional freedom, was much better in Weimar Germany than it is in Germany or most other European countries today. They're much more serious in preserving liberal constitutional order than Germany is now.
Recalling your time in one of the American universities, do you remember what were like the first signs that something is going wrong in this environment?
Well, there are lots of things I noticed going on when I was a graduate student at Yale in the mid 1960s. I mean, I couldn't have predicted that things would become as decadent as they are now, but I certainly knew things were going wrong. I mean, the Black Panthers wanted to take over the campus. Sure, come in, take it over. Expressions of white guilt, all the rest of this nonsense, feminism. Um, I noticed that the people who were teaching German history did not allow you to say what I thought was the traditional view that everybody had screwed up and caused World War. No, it was entirely the fault of Germany, and the German imperial government was like the Nazi. But you could see in this sort of guilt tripping of people the a kind of move in the direction that we have now, that the entire white race is evil and we're Nazis by nature, and and many people, of course, saying this, we're very soft on the communists. I remember in graduate school, the my classmates were always apologizing for Stalin. Never did anything wrong. So, so a lot of this leftist dottiness was there all along. What made it different was you had a counterforce. You had people on the right who resisted this. Not only the working class, there was a fairly large intelligentsia that resisting this as well. And things were not as crazy as they later became. And people accepted gender roles. You wouldn't put you in jail for saying that there are different genders. Um, Gay rights, nobody much cared about this. But the notion that Christians were guilty for racism and colonialism, and that the communists were good guys, these were pretty widespread ideas.
Yes. So I think this is where we can end on. Do you believe that American conservatism should be like their European counterparts, as in European conservatives, or vice versa, European conservatives learning from Americans?
Well, I really don't care. You know, they can all do their own thing as long as they resist the left. I mean, that's my only concern. You know, I mean, you know, if the United States has a Republican tradition, if England has a monarchical, that's fine. Oh, they're all good, fine. I am an agnostic. You can have a different form of government, of a president for life if you want. Fine. In fact, if Orban became president for the rest of his life, I think it'd be a good idea in Hungary. Um, but you know, I don't much care as long as you resist the left. That to me is the major concern. As long as you fight against the woke left. Now I do draw the line with Putin because he runs around killing his political opponents and started a war in the Ukraine. I don't like Putin. But when he makes statements against the woke left, I generally agree with him too. You know, I agree with the Iranian government or the Israeli government. Anybody who makes those statements, I agree with. And in the case of conservatism, I mean, as long as you are willing to fight the right, to fight for the right against the left, or fight for even fight for intellectual tolerance or something, which I really don't see much evidence of. The most important thing is to recognize the enemy is the left. And the conservative movement in the United States acts as if the enemy is the right. Anybody to the right of themselves is a Nazi or anti-Semite or racist or something like that, you know, and they're always looking for friends on the left. This is what I've criticized them for doing for years. So that when Barry Weiss, who is a left-wing lesbian, says, gee, they canceled me, immediately she becomes a hero. Because everybody on the right, like my whole life, I've been banned by them because I disagreed with the neoconservatives back in the 19. So they immediately, you know, cast you into outer darkness if you are inflexibly right wing or something. Whereas they always will look for friends on the left, you know, or if some black person said, you know, I may not vote for the Democrats. Oh, immediately this is going to be our ally now, or you know, I'm a transgendered Republican like Caitlin Chen. That's fine, you know, as long as you're not to the right of us. So, I mean, the conservative movement is not at all we need, you know, we don't need this as an opposition. We need an opposition that embraces the right and fights the left, you know, not one that, you know, marginalizes everything to its right and is always looking for pals on the left. Well, wants to have dialogues with its friends on the left and wants to be invited onto the View program with these 5 radical women. Now, I was invited yesterday. I mean, these people that don't believe in much of any. The one reason I do support them is because they, you know, we have been pretty much marginalized on the right, and they are the only opposition that can function. Partly because of what they did to us, but they are the only opposition that can function.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you very much, Paul Gottfried, for joining.
Okay,
Auf Wiedersehen.
thank you.